What would you do if the one act of kindness that ruined your biggest opportunity turned out to be the reason your entire life changed forever? It was barely 6 o'clock a.m. when David Carter stepped outside into a city still half asleep and soaked from last night's storm. The streets of Southbridge looked the same as always. Cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, and the soft rumble of old cars creeping past run-down apartment buildings. Puddles reflected the orange haze of early light, and gutters gurgled like shallow streams. David adjusted his tie with stiff fingers. It wasn't new. The navy suit he wore was 2 years old, bought off a clearance rack, and altered just enough to fake a proper fit. Still, he stood tall. Today was different. Today was his shot, the most important job interview of his life. He walked past a group of construction workers, sipping coffee from crumpled paper cups at the bus stop. Their voices were low, their faces sleepy, but their eyes followed him. Some glanced once and turned away. Others stared longer, not curious, judging. A young black man, in a suit, walking through Southbridge at dawn. They'd already written his story in their minds. Court date. Probation meeting. Never once. Financial analyst candidate. David had lived with those assumptions his whole life. The kind of doubt that doesn't shout, but lingers, settles on your back like a second skin. He felt it now, crawling up his spine, but he didn't break stride. 26, tall, lean, built like a runner, though he hadn't been inside a gym in months. His skin was dark and smooth. His cheekbones sharp. His mother always called it his serious face, even as a child. His jaw was clenched this morning, his lips pressed in a thin, determined line. And tucked under the sleeve of that old suit, a pair of silver cufflinks shimmered faintly in the dim light. They didn't match the suit, but they weren't supposed to. They belonged to his grandfather, a gift from his mother, a reminder of who he came from and who he could still become. David passed the corner laundromat, caught a glimpse of himself in the dark window, soaked sidewalk at his feet, streetlight above his head, and in between a reflection that looked steady on the outside. But inside, his gut twisted. Because this wasn't just any interview. It was the interview. Whitmore Blake Financial Group. Downtown Chicago. Glass towers, marble floors, 6-figure salaries, and a silent rule. You came from the right schools, the right families, the right part of town. David came from none of that, no trust fund, no legacy, just a perfect GPA from Chicago State. Years of working 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs, and one glowing letter of recommendation from Professor Daniel Brooks, the only man who ever looked past David's zip code and saw a mind built for markets. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out with cold fingers. Text from Mom. You got this, baby, just be you. I love you. His throat tightened. He tucked the phone away and whispered, I love you too, Ma. To no one but the wind. The train station was just ahead. His shoes clicked against the concrete, echoing in the morning hush. Other commuters trickled in, shoulders hunched, headphones in, coffee cups steaming. Everyone chasing something. David was chasing everything. The train doors opened with a hiss, and he stepped inside. He clutched his leather portfolio tight against his chest. Inside were extra resumes, a hand-marked market analysis, his elevator pitch months of preparation. He closed his eyes for a second and pictured the building. Whitmore Blake. He could see it from the highway sometimes, a shining tower with windows that seemed to scrape the sky. And now he was finally going inside. The train pulled into Monroe Station, and David stepped off. The wind hit him like a slap cold, bitter and full of Chicago's sharp spring edge. He tugged his coat tighter and walked fast. People surged around him now, streaming toward elevators and office towers. Their clothes were cleaner. Their watches more expensive, but David didn't flinch. He belonged. Even if no one believed it yet, he believed it. Then something changed. Heads turned. Phones lifted. A hush rolled through the crowd. Above the rooftops, the clouds twisted into low, grey spirals. The kind that didn't just bring rain, they brought warnings. Then the first drop hit. Sharp, cold, right on his cheek. Another followed. Then came the storm. Sheets of rain poured down without mercy. In seconds, his coat was soaked, his hair flattened to his scalp. People scrambled into doorways and under awnings. David ducked beneath the narrow shelter of a bakery. He checked his rideshare app, nothing. No drivers. He checked the time, 8:31 a.m. Still barely enough time, if the rain stopped. But it didn't. The city groaned under the weight of water. Trash danced in the gutter. A man slipped and cursed as his briefcase floated away. David exhaled hard. Not today. Please not today. He zipped his portfolio into his coat and stepped back into the storm. Shoes slapping the pavement, suit clinging to his back, head down. Determined. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because today wasn't just about money. It was about proof. Proof that a young black man from Southbridge had a place in those towers. That hard work could outrun circumstance. That dignity didn't come from a last name or a zip code, but from showing up. No matter what. And in that moment, drenched, freezing breath catching in his chest, David Carter kept going, unaware that just blocks ahead, a broken-down car and an old man in the rain were about to change his life forever. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it came down harder sheets of water slicing through the morning air, drumming against the pavement like a warning. David Carter hunched his shoulders and pushed forward. His polished shoes, once gleaming with care, now squelched with every step. Water poured off his coat, soaking through to his shirt. His tie clung to his skin. And still he walked. Every second mattered. Every block counted. And the gleaming tower of Whitmore Blake was just a few minutes away if the storm didn't stop him first. A yellow taxi pulled up ahead, brake lights glowing red in the grey gloom. A passenger stepped out with an umbrella, disappearing into a coffee shop. David's heart leapt. He sprinted forward, sloshing through ankle-deep water, waving his arm. "Hey!" Taxi. But just as he reached the door, another man appeared, white, well-dressed, camel-colored trench coat. Without a glance or apology, he shoved past David and climbed into the cab. The door slammed. The taxi peeled off, spraying David with a sheet of dirty street water in its wake. He froze in the middle of the road. Fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving, not just from running, but from something deeper, older. He'd seen that look too many times, the one that said, "You don't matter." The one that didn't need to speak, it lived in doorways that didn't open, in cabs that didn't stop, in eyes that skimmed over him like he wasn't even there. A horn blared behind him. David jumped back onto the curb, just in time to avoid a delivery van skidding past. His pulse thundered in his ears, but he didn't shout. Didn't curse. He just kept walking, because life had taught him early. Outrage gets you noticed. Control gets you in the room. Rain poured off his hair as he trudged forward, every muscle aching. His clothes were ruined. His resume, tucked tight inside his jacket, was probably a soggy mess. But he was still moving, still trying. Because that office tower wasn't just a job, it was proof that he was more than a statistic. More than a face from Southbridge, that he could stand on the same marble floors as kids with Ivy League degrees and family connections and hold his own. The wind whipped harder now, bending trees and sending umbrellas flipping like broken wings. David ducked behind a row of parked cars, shielding his face. Up ahead, he caught a glimpse of it. The tower. Whitmore Blake, tall and sharp, vanishing into the clouds. Its glass walls shimmered like mirrors. Somewhere inside, people were already sipping espresso, reviewing portfolios, setting meetings that would move millions. David checked his watch. 8:42 a.m. Still possible barely. He pressed on, eyes burning from wind and rain. His legs felt like bricks. His stomach a tight knot of nerves and hunger. He hadn't eaten breakfast. There hadn't been time. Or appetite. Only pressure. Then just as he reached the next intersection, he saw it. A sleek black sedan, parked at an odd angle, hazard lights blinking. The rear tire completely flat-folded under the weight of the car like a deflated lung. And next to it, an old man, white. Silver hair plastered to his forehead under a battered umbrella, suit wrinkled, soaked through. His hands fumbled with a jack, trying to steady it on the uneven asphalt. David slowed. For a second, the world seemed to pause. Rain still fell. Cars still passed. People still hurried by, heads down, eyes forward, but no one stopped. Not one person even looked, except David. He stood frozen at the corner, a decision stretching out before him like a fork in the road. To his left, the glowing tower, his future. To his right, the old man, stranded, struggling. He looked at the building again, just a few blocks now. The interview, the dream, he could still make it, barely. But then, his mother's voice echoed in his head. Clear, steady. From 1,000 moments just like this one. You don't help people when it's easy, baby. You help them because it's right. That's what makes you a man. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled tighter around the soaked leather portfolio. He looked once more at the man kneeling beside the flat tire. No cameras, no witnesses. Just a choice. David exhaled and crossed the street. "Sir!" he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. "Let me help you with that." The old man looked up, startled. His hat brim sagged with water. Rain ran down the lines of his face. "Oh no, it's fine," he stammered. "I thought I had it, but this damn jack won't hold. I haven't done this in years." David set his portfolio carefully on the back seat of the car, praying the interior wasn't already soaked. He shrugged off his coat and knelt beside the man. "You shouldn't be out here like this, sir," he said simply. The old man gave a small, embarrassed smile. "My driver's out sick. I didn't expect the storm. And, well, I'm not as young as I used to be." David didn't answer. He just got to work, hands moving with practiced ease, finding the jack point, adjusting the wrench, tightening bolts. Muscle memory kicked in summers spent with his uncle at the auto shop in Southbridge. Sweat, grease, laughter. Back then, he'd changed tires to earn a few extra bucks. Today, he changed one because someone needed him. "Looks like you've done this before," the old man said, watching him. David gave a short chuckle. "My uncle never let me drive his truck unless I could change the tire in under 10 minutes. The old man laughed softly. "Smart uncle." David tightened the last bolt and stood. His hands were filthy, his slacks soaked and stained. His watch now read 8:56 a.m. The interview was starting now. He'd never make it. The old man straightened beside him and extended a hand. "What's your name, son?" "David. David Carter." A strange look passed through the man's eyes. A flicker of recognition or something close to it. "You headed somewhere important, Mr. Carter?" David hesitated. He could have lied, could have brushed it off, but he didn't. He looked the man in the eye and said, "Yeah, the most important place I've ever gone." David Carter stood beside the black sedan, shoulders drenched, slacks soaked to the knee, heart pounding harder than it had in days. The tire was fixed. The jack packed away, the bolts tightened, twice checked, and glinting faintly under the grey morning sky. But something else, something far heavier, settled over him. The clock, the time, his shot was gone. Whitmore Blake was just a few blocks away. He could see the tip of the tower between two buildings, vanishing into the clouds. But it didn't matter now. He looked down at his hands. Dirty. Greasy. The rain had done its job, soaked through every layer of ambition, formality and preparation he had worn that morning. The crisp white shirt now clung to his back. His tie was a twisted string, and the portfolio carefully protected, lovingly prepared, had spent 10 minutes sitting on the leather seat of a car in a thunderstorm. He picked it up gently, still intact, but warped. The edges curled, ink lightly smudged. He held it to his chest like something sacred. The old man, grey-haired, gentlemanly, stood beside him under a dripping umbrella. "You didn't have to stop," he said quietly. David looked at him. Rain was still coming down in steady lines, running down both their faces, soaking into their shoes. "I know," David said, "but I couldn't walk past you." The old man's expression changed. Just a flicker. Not surprise. Respect. Then he opened the car door and gestured inside. "You're not walking the rest of the way dressed like that," he said. "Get in." "I'll drive you." David blinked. "You don't have to." "I insist." David hesitated for only a moment. He climbed in. The inside of the sedan was warm, quiet, too nice for a man like him to feel comfortable in. Leather seats, dark wood paneling, the soft scent of expensive cologne clinging to the upholstery. The car pulled away from the curb, windshield wipers thudding a steady rhythm. Neither of them spoke at first. David stared out the window, watching the city blur past. He felt like a ghost in a world that moved without noticing him. He stole a glance at the dashboard clock. 9:03 a.m. Interview time had already come and gone. He sank deeper into the seat. The weight of it, failure, regret, loss, pressed down hard. "You sure you still want to go in there looking like that?" the old man asked gently. David turned toward him. His jaw was tight, his chest a knot of hope and humiliation. "I have to try," he said softly. The man nodded once. Nothing more. The rest of the drive passed in silence. At 9:09 a.m., the sedan rolled to a smooth stop in front of Whitmore Blake. The building stood tall, sharp, impossible, its marble steps untouched by the storm still raging behind them. Inside, warm light glowed from within glass doors, polished floors, modern art on clean white walls. David stared at it, so close, but he didn't recognize himself in the reflection anymore. Soaked, wrinkled, tired, beaten by the weather, beaten by the odds. And still, standing, he turned to the old man. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse. The man only nodded again, as if he understood far more than he let on. David stepped out into the rain, his shoes squished with every step, the once polished leather now dull and stained. His jacket hung heavy with water. The cufflinks, his grandfather's, still clung to his wrists, shining silver under the rain. He pushed open the glass doors and stepped into another world. The lobby of Whitmore Blake was silent, pristine, high ceilings, marble everywhere. The kind of place where people didn't raise their voices. They raised their eyebrows. David stood there for a second, dripping onto the polished stone. The receptionist behind the desk looked up. She was young, blonde, dressed in a blazer worth more than his entire closet. Her eyes flicked over him. Then to her co-worker, a whisper, a smirk. He felt it, all of it. Shame, judgment, that look. What's he doing here? But he straightened his spine, stepped forward, and approached the security desk. The guard glanced up from his tablet, his expression shifting the moment he saw David's state. Disheveled, wet, out of place. David forced a steady voice. "Good morning, I'm David Carter. I have a 9 o'clock a.m. interview with the finance division." The guard raised an eyebrow. tapping on the screen. David could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, "Yes, Mr.
Carter, 14th floor," the guard said. He hesitated.
"They're strict about timing." "I understand," David replied. There was nothing else to say. He walked across the marble floor, each soggy step echoing behind him. People turned, looked, then looked away. He pressed the elevator button, waited, watched himself in the mirrored doors. He didn't look like a candidate. He looked like a man who had been left behind. When the doors opened, he stepped inside. Alone. The 14th floor was quiet, cool, modern, frosted glass partitions, cityscape art, soft lighting. The receptionist at this floor was older, elegant, professional. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she looked up. Her eyes widened just slightly when she saw him, then quickly reset into corporate calm. "Good morning," he said, adjusting his grip on the wet leather portfolio. "I'm David Carter. I had a 9 o'clock interview." She glanced at the clock behind her. 9:18 a.m. A pause. A small sigh. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "That would have been with Mr. Calloway. He's already moved on to the next candidates." David nodded slowly. He had known, but hearing it out loud felt like a door slamming shut. "I tried," he said, voice catching. "There was a man, a flat tire. She held up her hand gently. "I understand," but her eyes said, "Rules are rules." David reached into the portfolio, pulled out one of the resumes, warped, a little smudged. "Could you at least give this to him? Let him know I came." The woman took it, looked at it for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll make sure he sees it." Their eyes met, her calm, his brimming with something unspoken, regret, frustration, hope that hadn't quite died yet. David turned to go and walked slowly toward the elevator, every step heavier than the last. Outside the building, the rain had eased, but inside his chest, the storm was just beginning. The elevator ride down was silent, too silent. David Carter stood still, eyes fixed on his reflection in the mirrored walls. His shirt clung to his chest, wrinkled and soaked. His tie sagged like it had given up. Water dripped from the edge of his coat, leaving a small, shameful puddle at his feet. He looked like someone who didn't belong, like someone who tried too hard for a place that had already made up its mind. The doors opened with a soft chime, spilling him back into the gleaming lobby of Whitmore Blake. Same marble, same art, same expensive scent in the air, but everything felt colder now. He walked across the polished floor. His shoes still made that awful squish-squash sound with every step. The receptionist didn't look up this time. She didn't need to. His story was already over. He pushed through the glass doors and stepped back into the street. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Patches of sunlight peeked through thinning clouds, casting soft reflections off puddles and parked cars. But David barely noticed. He stood there, just outside the building, motionless. Cars passed, people brushed by him, the world kept spinning. As if nothing had happened, as if a man hadn't just lost everything. He didn't cry, didn't shout. There was no dramatic collapse, only a quiet kind of pain, the kind that sat deep in your chest and didn't need an audience. He walked, back toward Southbridge, back toward nothing. By the time David reached his apartment, the streets had dried, but he hadn't. His body ached. His coat was still damp. His shoes stained with city grime. His portfolio wilted in his hands like a bruised flower. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a kitchen barely big enough for a table. The radiator buzzed softly. Paint peeled from the windowsills. A flickering bulb above the sink blinked once, then went out. He set the portfolio down on the table and collapsed into the nearest chair. For the first time all day, there was no pressure to keep moving. No one to impress, no race to win, just silence and failure. David stared at the leather folder, the one he'd spent months building. Market reports, handwritten notes, a resume polished like glass. Now warped, smudged, edges curled from rain and regret. He had dried it as best he could last night with the old fan in the corner, but the damage was there. Permanent. A scar, just like the one today had left in him. On the wall, his jacket hung from a rusty nail. Water stains ghosted across the shoulders. His grandfather's cufflinks were still in the pockets, tiny flashes of silver barely visible from where he sat. They didn't shine today. They just sat there, quiet, like him. His phone buzzed. He didn't move at first, let it ring once. Then twice, then again. He reached over slowly and flipped it. Miss Angela Carter. Mom. He stared at her name glowing on the screen. Felt the familiar warmth just from seeing it, but he didn't answer, not yet. He hadn't told her, not the full truth. She had been so proud. She'd ironed that shirt herself when she mailed it to him, had wrapped the cufflinks in tissue paper scented with lavender soap. She believed in him in ways the world never did. And he couldn't bear to break that belief, not yet. The call went to voicemail. Then came the beep. Then silence again. David sat back in the chair, eyes closed, hands folded. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. He'd helped a stranger. In the rain. In a moment, no one would have blamed him for walking away. But now, he had nothing to show for it. No job, no callback, just wet shoes and a broken heart. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed pale blue against the shadows in the room. His resume stared back at him, open to the same file he'd checked 100 times before the interview. The blinking cursor felt cruel, like it was asking, now what? He didn't know. He had no backup plan, only one dream. And today, that dream had slammed the door in his face. Outside, sirens wailed faintly. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The city never slowed down for anybody's bad day. And Southbridge? It didn't care about crushed hopes or quiet decency. Or boys who tried hard and still got left behind. David leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The cracked paint looked like spider webs. He used to trace the shapes as a kid and imagine they were maps routes out of here, paths to something better. Today, all he saw were dead ends. The phone buzzed again. Not a call, a text. From Mom. Still proud of you, no matter what. Call me when you're ready. Love you always. His eyes stung. He swallowed the lump in his throat, typed back, love you too, Ma, then set the phone down, folded his arms on the table, and laid his head down, letting the silence settle around him like fog. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know if anyone would ever see what he gave up today, but for now, he let himself rest. Because being good shouldn't feel like losing. And yet, today, it did. The next morning came quietly. No thunder, no rain, just pale strips of sunlight slipping through the torn blinds, casting lines across the faded wallpaper and the chipped kitchen counter. David Carter sat at the old table, staring at the same screen he had opened the night before. His resume, same blinking cursor, same blank feeling in his chest. Nothing had changed, except him. He felt smaller somehow. Not defeated exactly, just hollow, like something important had drained out and didn't know how to come back. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the radiator and the faint sound of a neighbor's TV through the wall. David reached for his coffee mug, but the liquid inside had gone cold hours ago. He hadn't moved since dawn, hadn't slept much either. His suit jacket still hung from the nail near the door, water-stained and heavy with the weight of yesterday. The leather portfolio lay closed on the table, still warped, still bruised from the storm. He looked at it and felt the ache rise again. The kind of ache you couldn't fix with rest or coffee or pep talks. His phone buzzed against the tabletop. He flinched, then glanced at the screen. His mum, Miss Angela Carter. Her name alone brought a tightness to his chest. He hadn't called her back properly, hadn't told her about the interview or what didn't happen. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. But before he could press it, another notification flashed across the top of the screen. Unknown number. 312 area code. Chicago. He blinked. Froze. That wasn't spam. That wasn't a job board or telemarketer. His heart kicked once in his chest. He tapped to accept. "Hello?" he said, trying to steady his voice. "Mr. Carter?" a woman asked, her tone calm, polished. "This is Clara Reynolds, executive assistant to Mr. Jonathan Blake." David sat up straight. The name echoed in his ears, Jonathan Blake. The CEO of Whitmore Blake. His mouth went dry. "Yes, sir, yes. This is David," he said, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm calling on Mr. Blake's behalf to invite you to a meeting this afternoon, if you're available," Clara continued, her voice crisp and professional. 2:00, executive floor. 82nd level. David blinked. The room spun slightly. Was this a joke? A rejection follow-up? A formality? But her tone gave nothing away. No sympathy, no apology. Just calm efficiency, like this was the most normal thing in the world. He cleared his throat. "No directions needed," he said quietly. "I know where it is." "Excellent. We'll see you then, Mr. Carter." Click. The line went dead. David didn't move for a full minute. He just sat there, phone still in his hand, heartbeat loud in his ears. What just happened? Why was Jonathan Blake calling him? He thought back to the old man with the flat tire. His hands, his voice, his face. And suddenly, he knew. David stood so fast he knocked over the chair. He grabbed his jacket from the wall, ran his fingers over the ruined fabric. This time, he wouldn't let the storm follow him. By noon, his suit was pressed as best as an old iron and a borrowed steamer could manage. His shirt was fresh. His shoes were scrubbed and polished, even though the stains would never come out completely. But he didn't care. This wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about truth, about showing up again. At 1:17 p.m., a yellow cab pulled up outside the tower of Whitmore Blake. The sun was bright now, sharp and clear, shining off glass windows and marble steps. David Carter stepped out of the cab, adjusted his tie, and looked up at the building that had once made him feel small. It didn't feel so impossible now. Still tall. Still intimidating. But this time, he wasn't begging to be seen. He had been invited. David Carter stood in front of the building again, but this time, everything was different. No storm, no rain, no soggy clothes. No judgment at the front desk. When he gave his name, the security guard barely looked up. "Welcome, Mr. Carter," the man said, handing him a sleek black badge. The golden emblem shimmered faintly under the light. Executive access. Not an intern pass. Not visitor. Executive. David took a slow breath. The badge felt heavy in his hand. Not because of the material, because of what it meant. He stepped toward the elevators. The same mirrored doors opened with a soft whisper, and for the second time in 2 days, his reflection stared back at him. But today it looked different. He looked different, still nervous. Still not sure why he was here, but standing straighter, no longer asking to be seen. Chosen. As the elevator began to rise, so did his heartbeat. The numbers climbed. 42, 53. 68. Higher than he had ever been in his life, literally and figuratively.
Then 82. A soft chime. The doors opened, and the world changed.
The executive floor didn't look like any office David had ever seen. No cubicles, no noise. Just quiet power. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the far wall, flooding the space with sunlight. Clean lines. Dark wood. Marble floors that didn't feel cold. Paintings lined the hallway, not prints, but real art. The kind with brush strokes you could feel if you got too close. A woman in a navy suit approached, calm and composed. She smiled professionally.
"Mr. Carter, I'm Clara Reynolds." We spoke on the phone. David nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He'll see you shortly. Would you like some water or coffee while you wait?" "Water's fine."
"Thank you." Clara moved with practiced ease, returning moments later with a crystal glass. She gestured to the double doors at the end of the hall. "When he's ready, I'll let you know." David sat down slowly. The chair was softer than he expected. His hands rested on his lap, gripping the leather portfolio that had survived a storm, a rejection, and a second chance. He looked toward the doors. Massive, polished, closed. Somewhere beyond them, a man waited. Jonathan Blake, the same man he'd helped on the street. But not as a stranger this time, as a CEO, as someone who had summoned him not to scold, not to reject, but for something else. Something David didn't understand yet. He tried to steady his breathing, tried not to fidget, tried not to let hope spin too fast, because hope was dangerous. It made things hurt more if they didn't work out. But still, there it was, that quiet thrum in his chest, that voice that whispered, maybe, just maybe. This time the door opens, then click. The double doors opened slowly. Clara stepped aside, her voice calm but clear. "Mr. Blake will see you now." David stood. He adjusted his tie, held his portfolio close, and walked forward. Each step felt heavy, but not with fear, with possibility. David Carter stepped through the double doors into a space unlike any he'd ever seen. The office wasn't flashy. It was quiet. Understated. A long wall of windows opened out to the sprawl of downtown Chicago. Sunlight poured in, bathing the room in gold. Dark wood, a single leather chair, a desk built not to impress but to last. And in front of the window, with his back turned, stood a man. Still. Calm. Watching the city he helped shape. Then slowly he turned, and David's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face, not from the headlines, not from corporate press releases, but from the street, from the rain, from the flat tire and the shaking hands. The old man in the storm. Only now, he stood taller. Dry. Confident, powerful in a way that didn't need to raise its voice. Mr. Jonathan Blake, CEO of Whitmore Blake, and the man David had helped without knowing.
"Mr. Carter," Blake said simply, extending a hand. "Good to see you again." David hesitated just for a second.
Then stepped forward and shook it. The grip was firm, grounded. Like someone who didn't waste words or second chances. I didn't realize, David said softly. "Out there, I mean." "That I was the man who signed your interview invitation?" Blake finished, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. He nodded once. That's exactly why it mattered. David blinked. His mind scrambled to keep up. He had helped a stranger. He'd missed the most important interview of his life. He thought he'd lost everything. And now he was standing in the office of the very man he helped, the CEO. Blake gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down, David." David obeyed, carefully setting the worn leather portfolio on his lap. His fingers rested on it like it might disappear. Blake moved behind the desk, his motions precise, relaxed.
But his eyes, they were sharp, alive. He clasped his hands and looked out the window again. 58 years ago, he said quietly, I stood in a factory outside Pittsburgh. Nervous, in a cheap suit, asking a man 3 times my age to believe in an idea I could barely explain. He turned slightly. Sunlight caught the lines on his face. He said yes, and it changed my life. David listened, every muscle taut. He didn't know why he was here, but he knew this wasn't about punishment. This was about something else. Something bigger. Blake opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out something carefully wrapped in a dry cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. David leaned forward. It was his portfolio, the same one that had been drenched in the rain. Warped, bent, smudged. Blake placed it gently on the desk between them. I took the liberty of reading it, he said. David's throat tightened. He almost apologized for the damage, but Blake wasn't finished. Your market analysis on Southeast Asia, Blake said. Sharp, focused, better than half the consultants I've paid 6 figures. David's eyes widened, but Blake held up a hand. But that's not why you're here. David swallowed hard. It's not? Blake shook his head. No. I can teach someone how to read a balance sheet. I can train someone to build a portfolio or run a model. What I can't teach, what I never hire, without his character. David sat still. Completely still. Blake leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Most people in your shoes that morning, cold, wet, late, would have kept walking. I wouldn't have blamed them. A pause. But you didn't. You stopped. You helped. Not for credit, not because anyone was watching, but because it was the right thing to do. Silence settled in the room. David's eyes burned, just a little, because this wasn't about a job anymore. This was about being seen for who he was when no one was looking. Blake sat back in his chair, folding his hands. I built this company on quiet decisions. Moments no one else noticed. That morning you showed me everything I needed to know. David took a shaky breath. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Blake smiled faintly. Don't say anything yet. Just listen. David Carter sat quietly in the leather chair, still trying to wrap his mind around where he was and why. Across the desk, Jonathan Blake, the man behind one of Chicago's most powerful financial empires, didn't rush him. He simply watched. Calm, patient, like a man who understood the weight of a moment. Then Blake opened the portfolio once again. The worn leather creaked faintly. He slid a few pages forward. This cover letter, he said, tapping gently, wasn't written to impress anyone. You wrote it like you were talking to someone who mattered. David swallowed. That's because I was, he said softly. Blake smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. That honesty, he said. That sense of purpose. You can't teach that in business school. He closed the portfolio, laid both hands flat on it. And character, Mr. Carter, that's the currency I value most. David didn't know what to say. He'd spent his whole life believing he needed to prove himself with perfect grades, fancy language, and polish. But now, this Manthis CEO was telling him that his decency, the thing no resume measured, was the reason he was here. I have a stack of Ivy League applications on my desk, Blake continued. Dozens of polished suits, flawless speech, clean credentials. He paused. But not one of them knelt down in the rain to help a stranger. The room fell quiet again. David looked at the desk. At the cuff of his shirt, still a little wrinkled despite the ironing. At his hands nervous but steady, and then back up at the man who had seen him when no one else did. Blake leaned back in his chair. I'm not offering you the analyst position you applied for, he said. David's heart sank just a little. But then Blake added slowly, I'm offering you something else.
He folded his hands again, voice lower now but firm.
You'll work directly with me, as my special assistant. You'll sit in on meetings most people spend 10 years climbing towards.
You'll listen. You'll learn. You'll be uncomfortable, challenged, exposed to everything that builds more than just a resume, builds perspective. David's eyes widened. Not from fear, from wonder.
But, he started, hesitating.
I didn't even go to, Blake cut him off gently. You didn't go to Harvard or Yale or Stanford. I know. He leaned forward again. But you went through something harder. You fought to be here. You did the right thing even when it cost you.
That tells me everything. David sat back, stunned. No elevator pitch. No last-minute save.
Just truth, and someone who had recognized it. Blake stood and walked slowly to the window. For a long moment, he just looked out, watching the city stretch beyond the glass. Then he spoke without turning around. Someone gave me a chance once when I didn't look the part, didn't have the right background. He looked at me and said, I believe in what's underneath. He turned, met David's eyes, and it changed everything. He stepped forward again, held out his hand, calm, steady. Now I'm saying the same thing to you. David looked at that hand, then slowly, deliberately, reached out and took it. Not as the soaked kid who'd been turned away in the lobby, but as someone seen, chosen, respected. The rain that ruined his clothes hadn't ruined his chance. It had revealed his worth. And for the first time in his life, David Carter realized he didn't just belong in the building. He belonged in the room where the future was built. Monday morning came with no storm, no chaos, no missed trains, just a clear sky, a pressed shirt, and a name badge David Carter still couldn't quite believe he owned. Special Assistant to the CEO. The title looked surreal in black letters on gold trim, too official for someone from Southbridge, too sharp, too real. But it was his. He stood outside Whitmore Blake, holding a coffee cup he barely touched. People buzzed past, briefcases in hand, earpieces in ear, phones glued to palms. But this time, he didn't feel like an outsider watching from the edge of the sidewalk. This time, he walked in through the front doors as someone expected. The elevator ride to the 82nd floor felt different now. Not faster, not quieter, just calmer. Like something inside him had stopped running. When the doors opened, Clara Reynolds was already waiting near the entrance. Good morning, Mr.
Carter, she said with a warm, respectful nod. He returned the smile. Morning, Ms. Reynolds. Her brows lifted slightly at the way he said it. Not cocky, but steady.
Like a man who'd finally found his footing. Jonathan Blake's office door was open. David stepped in. Blake was reviewing a report, pen tapping rhythmically on his desk. He looked up and smiled. You're early, he said. David shrugged lightly. Didn't sleep much. Blake chuckled. Good. Shows you care. He stood, walked to the window. I don't need a robot beside me, David. I need someone who watches, who listens, who asks the questions no one else is bold enough to ask. He turned. That's how you'll learn. The rest of the morning moved like a blur. Conference rooms with city views. Executives in tailored suits speaking in financial shorthand. Charts, projections, names. David didn't recognize yet. He didn't say much, wasn't expected to. But he watched everything. Who spoke with authority, who listened without blinking. Who checked their phones when no one was looking. Who commanded the room with silence instead of noise. Jonathan didn't introduce David as an assistant. He simply said, he's with me, and no one questioned it. That, in itself, was a lesson. During a short break, David stood alone near a large window, sipping water. 2 junior analysts passed by, glancing at him. He caught one of them whisper, Is that the kid who missed his interview last week? The other shrugged. Guess not. They walked away. David didn't say anything, but he smiled to himself, because sometimes the best comeback isn't a speech, it's a seat at the table they said you'd never reach. That afternoon, Blake handed David a thick folder.
Your first task, he said. Read it, digest it.
And tomorrow tell me what we missed. David raised an eyebrow. You want me to challenge this? Blake smiled. Not challenge, clarify. Good leadership doesn't mean having all the answers. It means asking better questions. David took the folder, nodded. Inside were numbers, strategies, investor notes, and the quiet message beneath it all. You're not here to carry coffee. You're here to carry weight. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the Chicago skyline, David stayed a few minutes longer in the empty conference room. He looked around. The chairs, the long table, the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a city full of stories like his, most of them still waiting for someone to open the door. He placed his badge on the table for a second, ran his fingers over the words, then picked it up again. Because this time, he wasn't just grateful to be there. He was ready. The sun was just beginning to set when David Carter stepped off the bus at Southbridge and started walking home. The city felt slower here. Same cracked sidewalks, same flickering lights, same old corner store with the open sign that never turned off. But tonight, it didn't feel so heavy. He carried no briefcase, no badge on his chest, just a small paper bag with a dinner he picked up on the way fried catfish and sweet cornbread from Miss Lila's kitchen, his mom's favorite. As he turned onto their street, he could already smell lavender through the window. Miss Angela Carter, still cleaning, still humming gospel under her breath, still believing in her son, even when he didn't believe in himself. David stood at the door for a moment, his hand on the knob, then opened it. Boy, it's about time, his mother began from the kitchen, then turned. She stopped mid-sentence and stared, not at the food, not at the suit, but at his face. Something had changed. Not just on the outside, but behind the eyes. He smiled gently. I brought dinner. Angela stepped closer, drying her hands on a dish towel. You okay, baby? David nodded. I'm better than okay, Ma. He set the food on the table, then reached into his pocket, pulled out the gold-trimmed badge, placed it next to the cornbread. Her eyes widened. She picked it up slowly, reading the words twice before looking back at him. Special Assistant to the CEO. He nodded again, voice soft. I got the job. Actually, I got something better than the job I went for. She sat down slowly, one hand still covering her heart. I thought you said the interview. I missed it. I did, because I stopped to help a man with a flat tire. Angela stared at him. Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed strong. You stopped, because that's how I raised you. David smiled. Yeah. And turns out, that man was the CEO himself. She gasped, covered her mouth, then laughed, a sound like music through the walls. Lord have mercy. They sat and ate, talked and cried a little, and laughed more. David told her about the 82nd floor, the window that stretched over the city, the conference rooms, the folder Blake gave him, and about the people who now listened when he spoke. Angela just listened, proud. Quiet, still shaking her head like she couldn't believe it, but she could. Because she always had. Later that night, David stood at the window of his childhood bedroom. Same view, same moonlight bouncing off rusted rooftops, but something inside him felt different, not bigger, not more important, just clearer. He thought about everything that had happened. The rain, the missed taxi, the ruined suit, the closed doors, and the one that finally opened because he didn't walk past someone who needed help. He looked down at his cufflinks. Still his grandfather's, still a little tarnished, but glowing faintly under the soft light.
He smiled, then reached for his phone and typed a message to Clara Reynolds. "Please tell Mr. Blake I'll be in early tomorrow. I have questions about that Southeast Asia forecast." The next morning, when David boarded the train to downtown, he passed by the same group of construction workers at the Southbridge stop. One of them looked up, stared a little longer than usual, then nodded once. Not a smirk. Not judgment, just quiet respect. And David nodded back. Because now he understood something deeper. You don't need the world to open every door for you. Sometimes, you just have to hold one open for someone else, and that's how your own future walks in. In life, the moments that define us often don't come with applause. They happen in silence, in the rain, in the rush, in the choice to help when no one's watching. David Carter didn't rise because he wore the finest suit or had the perfect resume. He rose because, when faced with a moral crossroads, he chose kindness over ambition. And that choice, seemingly small and costly, became the key that opened a door no degree ever could. Many of us, especially in our later years, wonder, did I matter? Did I choose right when it counted? This story reminds us that we are measured not by our titles, but by our character in quiet moments. So whether you're holding a resume, a hand, or a memory, you matter. Memory has. And sometimes the most powerful things we build aren't careers, but the legacy of decency we leave behind. Do good, especially when it's hard. Someone might be watching not to judge, but to believe in you.